Hey, this is Gone with Gandalf. Watch this video and you will learn how to use the palantír, or the seeing stones, from the Lord of the Rings. I'm not saying that everyone has one of these hanging around in Middle-earth, because they don't, and they are extremely rare, but if you were to come across one, then this is useful knowledge that you don't get in the films alone, and that is coming up. Now, on this channel, I talk about J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth, and I like to answer questions that people may have on some of the aspects therein. But you clicked on this video to find out how they work, but if you aren't sure as to what one is, then here is a primer. A palantír, or a seeing stone, or just a stone, would be found always standing on a low round table and kept there within a small cup if the stone isn't particularly large, or in a depression if it is a bit larger in the black marble top. This setup means that they can be revolved by hand if needed, and the stone itself was a perfect sphere, and when not in use it would be the deepest black in colour and look as if it were made of solid glass. However, if they were rolled off the holding tables, then they would not smash, dent or crack like glass probably would. They would have no damage on them at all. It is not clear as to what they are made of, but they are deemed indestructible unless you use the heat of a volcano. Now, how can you see through these seeing stones then? Well, they would show you things far off, and that sounds obscure because without skill it would show you a random place, perhaps even at a random time, and there is no context given to the viewer, or as you are known now, the surveyor. The stone has a certain orientation that it must be in, which requires it to be kept in position on the tabletop. A stone will have permanent poles, just how a magnet has in the real world, and the centre of a palantír must be positioned so that it points to the centre of the earth. For the stone to be upright, the permanent nether pole must therefore be at the bottom. So when and if the stone is revolved, the axis must remain unchanged, else it won't work. And should the stone be moved off its position by accident or on purpose, then it must be realigned perfectly before it can be of use once more. Now then, the surveyor is stood by his palantír and wants to look over the lands to his west. Then, to do so, he must stand on the eastern side of the stone and look through the stone towards that direction. It is very similar to a telescope in this regard. However, the palantír has the power to look through obstructions such as walls or even mountains, but to see what is on the other side, the area must be lit, else it is dark. And the palantír's vision doesn't add any light on its own. So if you try and use it to look into a dark cave in the mountains, then chances are that you won't be able to see anything at all. This means that for those that were aware of the palantír or palantírs, they were wary of them, they could try to shroud themselves from view. To note though, the palantírs are only seeing stones, because if you converse with another stone, then you can't talk to the other surveyor. You can transfer thought, and this is then received as speech in their heads, presumably, and this depended on the will of the user of either side. Not all stones could converse with each other, as they would have to be in accord with one another, and there's it's not always clear as to which ones are in accord with another, but it's generally they're kept fairly close by one another so that they are in range. There is no note on what this means exactly, but I presume this means that they each have to be able to face one another, more on that in a bit, and be in range of each other, as I already said. So not all palantírs could communicate the vast distances between the holdings in Gondor and Arnor, and that flows quite nicely into the next section. And indeed, not all of the palantír were equal. There were major and then there were minor stones, which alluded to their sizes as well as their use. A minor stone would have a fixed position of view, so whilst you can still revolve and turn the stone, it's only in one orientation that it would be useful and have anything to show, and this would be in a bearing, so north, east, south, or west, or in between. So that might be that a stone can only see locations to its west or to its east, etc., etc. The stone then, if you were to try and look in any other bearing, it would be blank, looking into any of the other bases as they're known. A major stone, though, was not so limited, and these could be used to look in the whole 360-degree angle about them, provided that they were still at the correct axis and set in their holding, etc., etc. Hence, these would be held in bigger stations, and they would be held in, and the tower would be suitably large and defensible, because you don't want someone else to have these, obviously. Now, if you look into a palantir, you'll see an image of the land in that bearing that you are looking in, as I've already gone through. This isn't always so useful, but if you have a strong will and the skill to use a stone, then you will be able to direct the gaze of the stone where you wish, with your mental dexterity, perhaps even a little off the bearing that the stone would otherwise see in. You could even enlarge a vision of a gathering of people enough to view a single figure, and if the surveyor, so you, were to know that person, then you would then also be able to recognize them. It gives enough detail there. By doing so, though, the background of the image will deteriorate and blur. Now, if you are really good at using a palantir, then you could even enlarge this image of a person enough to see what kind of ring they are wearing, for instance. This level of concentration is something that only comes with a learned and practiced mind, and perhaps a modicum of talent. The level of exhaustion caused by this would mean that only at great need would this be done, and overdoing so could cause premature aging. A palantir can be used by anyone to obviously different degrees of success, presumably, but it is most amenable, so most usable, to someone with the authority and the right to use it, which is to say someone like the Steward of Gondor or the exiled heir of Isildur, which is just as well, since these are the only ones that would get a chance to, really. Not like your average hobbit. So, this is all fine and all, but where would you find one of the palantirs? Well, the palantiri were given to Amandil, and he was the father of Elendil, on Númenor by the elves so that they could remain in contact, because at that time, by the end of the Second Age, the king of Númenor had great mistrust of the elves, so he banned them to visit the island from Valinor, because they would often come and sail, come for a bit and then say hi, and then sail back home. Now, when the downfall of Númenor occurred and sank the kingdom below the sea, Elendil and his sons Isildur and Anarion escaped on ships to Middle-earth, and the Palantiri were some of the heirlooms that they were able to bring with them. There were seven of them in total, and Isildur and Anarion had 4 of them in the southern kingdom of Gondor, and Elendil had 3 in the northern kingdom of Arnor. Now, the 4 of Gondor were housed in Minas Ithil, Osgiliath, Minas Anor, and the fortress of Angrenost, aka Isengard, and also Minas Anor would later be known as Minas Tirith, and Minas Ithil would become Minas Morgul. Now, the 3 of Arnor were at Anuminas Amonsul, also known as Weathertop, and in the Tower Hills, the Emun Bereid, Gil-galad, the elf, raised the White Tower of Elostirion to house the 3rd. The major stones would be the stones of Amonsul and Osgiliath, and these stones are far larger than the miners and would take multiple men to move, and these stones would be able to communicate between the 2 kingdoms. And then you have the minor stones would only have the range in the order of 500 miles, which is roughly the distance between Isengard and like Minas Tirith and Osgiliath, Minas Ithil. And their size would be of about 1 foot in diameter. And those that aren't familiar with the imperial measurement system, 1 foot is about 30 centimeters. And the Palantir in the Tower Hills was a special one, because this stone would not be able to communicate with any of the other 6 stones in Middle-earth, and had only one face, so only one orientation that would show anything. And this pointed out to the west, and it was said that Elendil would often come and view through the stone and try to catch a glimpse of the Tower of Avalone in Tol Eressëa, where allegedly there was the Master Stone of the Elves, who of course gave all the stones to Amandil and his family. This stone was kept and guarded by the elves, however, of Lindon, and they seem to have been able to communicate with their kin in the west with it, and that was its only use. Now, if you want to learn more, then click here to subscribe, because I have another video soon to follow this one to elaborate on why they were such a well-kept secret and what happened to them. And by the time of the Lord of the Rings, and also by the time of the Lord of the Rings, why was it so taboo to use them? And when they seemed so innocent. But for now, thanks for watching. I am going with Gandalf. Good day.